morning. It's Monday morning again, and it's cold as heck outside. If you have spent any time in Maryland, I shouldn't complain though, right? It's cold, but it's negative 27 degrees in Iowa last week. So I really shouldn't complain. I'm going to stop that. So we are ASMM Digital Small Business Connection. I'm Ann Brennan. I'm the owner and CEO of and social media marketer at ASMM Digital. I'm also the founder of Burgers and Bans for Suicide Prevention. So look that up if you get a chance. It's our suicide prevention charity. It's here in Maryland. It's a really great charity. So I'd love you to learn more about that. But we are the podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. And our goal each and every week is to give you something you can walk away with, something that you can put to work in your business right away. That's my goal every time. And I want to introduce you to interesting people every single time. So we've got somebody great today. We'll talk about him in just a minute. I will also want to remind you to subscribe. You can subscribe over at YouTube/Brennan Annie. I'm Brennan Annie. You can also, and actually you can find me anywhere as Brennan Annie if you want to find me personally, but you can also subscribe wherever you're listening to the podcast, and I'd really like you to do that. If you're listening to this live, or watching this live, you're probably watching it on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter. If you're watching it, ask questions. We've got people here right now who can answer questions. We've got experts in the room. If you're a musician, today is going to be right up your alley. If you want to find out how to make your music make money, if you want to find out how to make your music a business, this is a great time to do it. But also, there are other lessons. If you're not a musician, if your business has nothing to do with that, you're going to learn something in this episode today. We're going to talk about a lot of different things. Specifically, we're going to talk about disrupting your industry, disrupting what is happening in your industry right now. That's what we're going to talk about. Our guest today is Matej Harangozo. He is an award-winning entrepreneur, music enthusiast, and an innovative technologist. He's a driver of disruption with a track record of developing cutting-edge platforms and automation protocols. Recently, he's made the pivot to something he's really passionate about, music. It's an industry he's been dreaming of being in since he was a teenager, since he was in high school, and through his quest to help independent artists, producers, DJs, and influencers get noticed, he created Open Source Entertainment, a record label and music business incubator, and Digital Science Media, its digital marketing arm. These two organizations are disrupting the music industry, representing breakout artists including Hello Sister, China Mac, the Gospel Record Label, Black Smoke Music, and many others. I'm really excited about having Matej on today. Matej, I think I just called you Mateo, even though I said I wasn't going to do that. Did I do that?
No, you actually got my name right. But if you say Mateo, I'm still fine with that. That's the Spanish version of my name.
Awesome. It's really nice to meet you. I'm so glad you're on.
Nice to meet you as well. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and you're a local Marylander.
Yeah.
So we get people from all over the world on here, so it's really fun when I come up and see you on screen and go, oh, you're just down the road from me. So that's really nice. So talk a little bit about your love of music.
Definitely. So love of music, I would say, started for me really since childhood. I can remember. So first of all, I grew up in Slovakia, and during communism, you couldn't really get your hands on Western music, but my father was able to, and my mom would get a lot of like Queen records, Madonna, Pet Shop Boys, Pink Floyd, stuff like that. So I guess those are the early sounds that I grew up on. But then when I moved to America at almost age 12, like most kids, I kind of fell in love with hip hop, even though I didn't understand English yet correctly. But the sound and the culture, something just captivated me about it. So, the love for music started early on in middle school in United States, and kind of shaped how I would get into the music industry eventually and why I would be doing what I'm doing.
That's great. So tell me, what are you doing? You've got a record label. So tell me more about what you're doing.
Okay, so in how this was all formed is kind of interesting. There's multiple kind of life business events that kind of shaped the company that I have now and what we're doing. But I would say in high school, I was the first kid that had the 1X CD burner, and I would, basically make copies of CDs that were the hottest ones coming out, and that was sort of my side hustle. So that was a way to really get into the music industry for me. But like more from a business standpoint, I was obsessed with figuring out who were the executive producers behind certain albums, how the business ran, whatever I could research back then. It was not a lot of music business behind the scenes articles or knowledge that was coming out. It was mostly, front facing artists. But anyways, that's kind of where it started. Moving forward, when I was a co-founder of a company called Greenuit, which was an energy efficiency company here in Maryland, that was me and my business partners, one of our biggest successes. So that's when, money was really a lot better for me than any point in my life. We had a lot of employees. I gained a lot of knowledge in business. And at the time, this was like 2012, I was on a national committee that was trying to standardize energy efficiency data and how banks, utilities, the energy efficiency contractors would kind of report to one, standardized way of collecting the data. So loans can be given, grants can be given, subsidized money could be spent correctly and all that. And when I was on there, I learned a lot about software development and the open source methodology of how open source platforms are really transforming businesses. Even for me as an entrepreneur in early, 2008, when we were really getting this company off the ground, being able to utilize like Google Apps and just kind of different open source things that we didn't have to pay $20,000 a year for, that really help us accelerate our business. So when I got into music, when the money was good, of course, you see the studio behind me. It was an expensive hobby. I dumped a lot of money into the equipment. My ex-girlfriend at the time was a singer, so it made me more passionate about it. I got into production first as a hobby, to be a producer, to be an engineer. That came to me fairly fast because I went to school for mechanical engineering. So just knowing the scientific concepts of like compression and EQ and reverb,
Right.
just from science, made sense, and it accelerated my learning of the production. But that's where the word open source entertainment came from, because even in those early days in like 2012, 2013, when I sort of came up with the name, I envisioned having a music artist incubator that would allow the musicians to learn the business on a much larger scale, or really for some just for the first time, because I saw a dissection in the industry that, a lot of the labels were it was designed to sign artists that were not knowledgeable about the business, to kind of squeeze every artistic juice out of them as possible. So that's kind of where the early idea came from. And then later down the line, and I'm sure we'll talk about one of my biggest failures, at least the way I see it. Once I had to transition from the energy efficiency industry into my next venture, I chose software development because that's what I was good at. That's where my expertise was at, and the music industry. And I've invested some money into some artists that were on my so-called independent label, and we got scammed for a lot of money from PR and marketing agencies that were selling us the dream, but didn't actually do anything for us. A lot of fake streams and all of that. So from that experience, when I got into the music industry, I basically said, all right, I'm going to really give this artist incubator and teaching artists about the proper marketing, the proper startup tools they need to, have to really get in the music industry. And that's sort of the story. It's a little bit long-winded, but there was a lot of elements that shaped this.
Yeah, but I want to say something, and I'm just going to put this out there, and I know I know you'll agree with it. If a marketing company tells you they're going to make you famous without you having to do any work, they are lying.
Yep.
And people who meet with me are always surprised. I actually did have a person who said to me, "So what are the guarantees? What are the guarantees?" And I said, "Oh, there are no guarantees. I cannot give you guarantees on how this is going to work. This is fluid. It happens. We do the best we can. Everybody's doing the best they can, but I'm not making you promises. What I will tell you is that if you work hard with me in your digital marketing, we're going to do great. Great
Yep.
things will happen, but it has to be, you cannot hand your digital marketing to somebody and
Absolutely.
say, here, you run with it, because you've got to be involved. You've got to share your post. You've got to be a part of it. You've got to be out there. You've got to be making content as a musician. That's especially true, right?
On a daily basis, absolutely. And I like, the fact that you said that, because what I tell our clients a similar thing, but I tell them one thing I can guarantee is that we're going to get your content and your product or your service in front of hundreds of thousands or millions of consumers, and we'll get you feedback on what they think you're doing. And hopefully you listen to our strategy, or hopefully you do something constructive with that feedback, and help it shape your company, you as a musician, you as a band moving forward. But
Right.
it's absolutely true. And you're right. The marketing is just a portion of everything that has to happen in parallel. The content creation, the understanding of the business, building your team. And, that's one thing that our marketing agency sort of helps with as well, that strategy in our new Indie Artist Accelerator, which I can talk about later. But it's super important, because if you don't help your client understand the business while they're marketing, they may stick around and be a client for 2 or 3 months. And guess who they're going to blame when they don't get what they wanted, because they only relied on the digital marketing service to blow them up or to make them famous, because that's not going to happen, like as you said.
Absolutely. I had to show you this. So Michael Kimona showed up and said, very interesting session. The reason I put this up here just now, I put the comment up on the screen, is because I think it's really funny how we can talk about something. You and I were talking about this just before we went live.
Hmm.
And live video is so great because we have this power of bringing somebody on who can say something. And Michael, we just talked about him because I think that his Warrior Music Foundation would be a great fit for you. So where do you think the music industry is heading?
The trend that I really love is two major trends. One is people like myself and others, probably Michael as well, is really educating the independent artists on the music industry. I've never seen more educational material out there about how to properly navigate through the music business. Now, it is sort of a wild west industry, because there's 1,000 different ways you can grow your brand, but business 101 concepts never go away. Supply and demand, and how to set up marketing strategies or structures in Facebook or YouTube or whatever the case may be. But that's one trend that's exciting me, and I could see that because major labels don't like it. I've gotten pushback. I've gotten
Right.
warning DM messages, which I'm not going to get into now, but that's one trend that excites me. The second trend is that everything in the music industry for artists, and then not just music, but even for content creators, is starting to be monetized the proper way. So whereas 5, 6 years ago, we're still living in this gray land of like, yeah, let me put out music on Spotify and Apple Music, but I'm getting pennies on the dollar and I'm working so hard, but it's just, I can't find this consistent like monthly income to live off of for monthly musicians. So now, fast forward to 2021, it's not just the streaming platforms that are out there, but kind of like monthly, like Patreon, for example, or even
Right.
OnlyFans. I know it gets a bad name because of what type of people are monetizing their skills through OnlyFans, but essentially it's like you build a fan base, you build a demand for what you're doing, and there's probably thousands of ways to monetize it. Even give it either give an exclusive access or putting your music or content on all these major platforms that have finally gotten around the law to make sure everything is properly monetized, that people are not stealing your intellectual property as a musician, that if they catch
Right.
somebody else, you get to decide, okay, cool, I'm going to let them do a cover of my song, but I'm going to take 80% of their monetizable revenue off of YouTube. They can keep 20, because at the end of the day, they're branding me as well. So I'm excited about that trend, and those two trends specifically. More of the education for independent artists, and the fact that
Right.
everything is becoming more and more monetized and secure, and the ability that artists can extract that monetization from their content.
Well, I have to say, as a mom of a young musician, I'm happy to hear that too. So
Yeah,
you worry when you've got a son who says, "I'm going to be a musician." Oh, great, sweetie. Let me open my basement for you. So hopefully
there you
that's
go.
not going to be the case. But well, you know what? Let's move on to something. The difference between being an entrepreneur and a business owner, because we told people today that they would come here. We're going to talk about what it means to disrupt an industry and how they can use some of this information in their business. So talk a little bit about the difference between being an entrepreneur and being a business owner.
I think first and foremost, entrepreneur loves solving problems. It's like in your blood. It's sort of, sometimes the word hustle gets used in like, bad connotation or like a bad way. But I think hustle is that never ending want or energy to figure stuff out, to solve a problem. I think that's an entrepreneur. And also an entrepreneur slightly applies different methodology to grow in their business. They're more creative, more innovative. A business owner is more so. Let me give you an example. Like if somebody is able to buy into the Subway franchise,
Right.
they go through their Subway University, they put up the $200,000 required to have your shop, and they operate the Subway or McDonald's according to their operational blueprint. I think that's a business owner. An
Right.
entrepreneur is the person that builds the next Subway.
Right. So
If that makes sense.
actually, it's really interesting you use that example because I think you can be both, but it's very rare. So there's a woman, and I'm so sorry. I will try to find her name to put in the show notes. But there is a woman who I listened to on how I built this, and I think it was how I built this. It doesn't matter. It was on a podcast, and she owned McDonald's. She owned several McDonald's
Hmm.
locations, and then they asked her to be on a committee where they talked about the people who their suppliers. So it was basically a bunch of owners who came together and they talked about and negotiated with their suppliers to get a better deal. But they made her, and honestly, quite honestly, they made her the bun lady. And this was in probably the 80s. And they did it facetiously because she was the only woman on the thing. And they were, they were talking about her buns, right? This was the whole story behind it. But she loved it. And she went out and realized that, wait a second. So these manufacturers who are making the buns for our McDonald's burgers, there's more to them than that. So she
Hmm.
actually started buying factories that made buns for McDonald's and supplied to McDonald's. And this was before there was a contract in there that said, hey, you can't also be a supplier to you can't, in the contract that said you can't be a supplier. So at the time, she just got right around that. She was able to do it. And she's built an entire industry off of being able to create bread products, make bread products for different places like McDonald's and Wendy's and other places like Panera. And it was really interesting to see for me to watch the difference between her being a business owner with the other guys who put her on the bun committee to them
Yep.
becoming a real true entrepreneur and how do I solve this problem for them.
I'm glad you say that because look, I hate making blanket statements, and I hate some of the division, and I don't like using the word hate either. But I think that's one of the problems with our society is that we always try to put people in a like specific bucket. But you're absolutely right. Like entrepreneurs are in many ways business owners, and business owners are in many ways entrepreneurs because they're innovative with their own business processes, and it's a blend. It's the same kind of thought process, but yeah, you're right. It's a
No,
blend.
I think you're right. I mean, so think about it if you go on another level, right? You could be a business owner who just says, I really like making cupcakes, so I'm going to open a cupcake store.
Hmm.
But you open the cupcake store and there are three others in town. What problem did you solve?
Right.
Right? But if you come up with an innovative way to open that cupcake store, and this is a stupid idea, but I'm just going to throw it out there anyway. Somebody will probably take it and run with it. But my son somewhere learned when he was little, like 3 or 4 years old, that if you take a cupcake, you cut the bottom part off, just slice it right off, put it on top, then you get icing with every bite of your cupcake. So you've made a cupcake sandwich, basically.
Hmm.
So then you've solved a problem. Now you have, instead of having the top where you eat the bottom and then you go to the top and eat all the frosting, you actually have frosting with every bite,
Yeah.
right? So then you've solved a problem and that makes you an entrepreneur.
Absolutely. Similar to what I, was thinking about in 2013, like, yeah, am I just going to be another independent label? Like, there's too much competition in that. What's different? What's missing? What was some of my pet peeves about the industry? How do you solve it? So you're absolutely right. And I love when people innovate. I've read a few books recently on how certain franchise owners of Subway innovated, and that's how the Jared commercial, which increased Subway sales across the board nationally, was born because it was one of those smaller, you know, initially business owners that innovated and really pushed for this, going all up to corporate, is responsible for growing the entire corporation. And I love that.
That
So
is, yeah, I love that too. I love it. And I think it's just really interesting to watch that you can have somebody who's in both places. You
yep.
can have somebody who's a business owner and an entrepreneur. You can have somebody who's just strictly an entrepreneur. They're going to start the business and then they're going to go on to solve another problem.
Yeah. And
Right?
it's funny, as you grow as an entrepreneur, I remember when we grew Greenuit, our company that got up to almost 50 plus employees. You have to start dealing with business owner issues. Like we have to hire an HR company, help out with our HR laws. And as entrepreneurs, as free spirited, big thinkers, me and my business partners are like, man, are you serious? We got to do X, Y, and Z. That's Maryland law, and that's where you have to also become a business owner eventually as an entrepreneur, because as your team grows, you can't just do whatever the hell you want. There's certain laws you have to abide by down the line.
Right. Well, we actually are going through that right now, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, so I don't get slapped on the wrist. But I hired a business strategist, and she says, "Oh, you have to do this," and I was like, "Oh my God, really?"
Yeah.
And she's like, "Yeah," and I'm like, "I haven't been doing that for 5 years," and we've changed it. We're changing it, but it was a surprise. So you just never know what's going to come out. I want to go back. You talked about a little bit about learning from failure. You talked a little bit about the failure that you experienced, your biggest failure. But how did you learn from it, and then how did you put that to work for your business?
So one of my personal, biggest failures was that we were we had to end up shutting down our biggest company, or which was part of my biggest success as well. I think largely it was that we, the term that says don't depend on the government heat. That was one thing. A lot of our revenue was coming from subsidized projects across Maryland and surrounding states. But the failure that I learned from is that, okay, after this company was done and we went through some, major financial hardship, not just myself, but my business partners as well, was how do you recover from that? And, I wanted to build another business, and I had this struggle because I'm like in my early 30s. I there's a lot of pressure from society. Like, I'm not married yet. I don't have, a house that I bought because I've invested my money elsewhere. So a lot of things. And, my family's like, man, maybe you should just, you tried the entrepreneur thing, you've had some successes, but, you're 30, you got to maybe get a job and you work for somebody. But I was stubborn. I was like, nah, this can't be it. Like, I have to put all that entrepreneurial knowledge and the learning from many companies that have failed even before Green knew it to work. So it was very scary, but I did it. In fact, I started driving Uber and Lyft on the side while living off my savings, and all the money from that went to marketing this new music industry company. So I went back to hustle mode. I had to humble myself. And the major thing I learned from that failure is that even though it was super hard, and you can't turn to a lot of times your family members or people around you that live the traditional lifestyle, 9 to 5 and all. That's tough. They can't really help you. So I learned how to seek out other information. I became obsessed with listening to books about, Elon Musk and other major, great entrepreneurs that have done in the music industry, to get that good feeling like, look, they've all failed in major ways, but they kept going. They didn't give up. And I've learned that, stick to your gut sometimes. There's no business strategy for sticking to your gut, but being able to tough it out. And even having that vision again, look, how long did it take us last time to build 2 companies that got into revenue? We can start paying ourselves 2 to 3 years. Okay, I'm at, basically back at zero. I will have to go 2 to 3 years to see it through. Being 31 or 32, whenever that happened, am I going to be willing to do that? So I took another major, and I did. What made me feel good is that I got an offer from AARP to be like an entrepreneur in chief, to basically handle small projects through the lean startup methodology and get them to fruition, to see if ARP would fund them further. And that was a $150,000 or so position. And it was offered to me just from my LinkedIn profile. I didn't even have a resume. And that gave me the gut to be like, you know what? I didn't even try to get a job. And I got this offer from my previous networks and from my LinkedIn profile. I got to stick this entrepreneurial thing out. And I'm glad I did. So, and look, and through that process, I failed every day. And I forgot where I got this, but this saying, fail as fast as possible, as frequently as possible, because that means you're learning. And
Absolutely. And that is another difference. I'm going to say it right there. That is another difference between being an entrepreneur and being a business owner. When you're a business owner and you fail, you go, oh, okay, well, most businesses fail within the first 5 years, right? But when you're an entrepreneur, when you've really got that entrepreneurial spirit, you're like, well, okay, so how do I learn from this, and how do I take that to the next level? And whether that's going to be rebuilding this business or rebuilding another business, or starting to build another business, I think that's a big difference as well. So let's talk a little bit more about becoming a disruptor, and what does that mean exactly?
I think for me, it means that once I dive into a particular industry or a particular problem, I try to look at what solutions are out there, kind of like a mini feasibility study. What's the landscape? What's our competition? How people are doing it? And then really think about, well, why aren't people doing things this way? Is it illegal somehow on the federal level or local? What's going on here? And then if I feel like, and it's not like on purpose that I only want to go into an industry where I can figure out something that hasn't been thought about, or maybe has been thought about, but is not getting enough light yet. But I think that's disruption. It's like you get in there, and if you were to watch, again, traditional media, CNN or, MSNBC, news like that, most people, 85% would be like, well, that's not going to catch on, it's not going to work. But it ends up working and beyond people's expectation, and it disrupts the industry. Many examples pop to mind. I mean, Uber, major one, Airbnb, MTV back in the day when I studied the music industry. Everybody in the music industry said this MTV thing, the 24 hours of music videos, who the hell is going to watch that?
Right,
And
exactly,
it changed the
exactly.
industry. So I think is like analyze the problem, the industry, and is there something that could be done better in the entrepreneur's opinion that you could really disrupt it? You could change the way it's been kind of operating for a long time. I think that's disruption.
Yep. When I first started ASMM Digital, I went to a conference out in San Diego, social media marketing world, and there was a guy out there, a big company out there, and they had these coaches who would sit down with you and talk to you about where your business was going and how it would scale and could it scale, right?
Hmm.
And the guy said to me, I told him what I did, and I will tell you the tiny thing that I told him I did that he said, oh, that'll never work, and this was 5 years ago, and he said. I said what we do that's different than other people is we comment back anytime somebody comments on one of our clients' posts. We comment back. We actually respond and we answer reviews, and we if they'd like to post, we invite them to like the page. These are things we do. And he goes, "Oh no, you can't do that. That's not scalable." And and I almost walked away from it. And because I was like, well, maybe he's right. And maybe it's not scalable. And 5 years later, it's the reason people hire us because they don't have to go into their social media and pay attention to it. We're learning about their industry. And that, yes, means I have to call them once in a while and say, hey, do you guys do this? Is this something I don't know about? Is it something, I have to get an answer. But then we
Yeah.
learn, and we can then continue to do it. So and actually, I think it's Mark Jacobson, who was one of the founders of Netflix. He said the same thing. The number of people who said, oh, that's not going to work.
You
Right.
know,
And it was Netflix. Actually, 50 they were offered, they went to sell Netflix to Blockbusters.
yeah.
And they wanted to sell it, and they said we want $50 million, and they said Blockbuster says no, we just don't think it's going to work.
I read about that story. You're right. I mean, Netflix came up with a product that was ahead of the technology that existed.
Right.
And they waited
Right.
it out till the technology became available because they knew it would. I love that.
Absolutely. Yep.
Absolutely.
And so, do you have a tip you think for people who are thinking, okay, I want to become an entrepreneur, I want to become a disruptor? Do you have a tip that will make it easier for them?
Yes. Treat everything like a mini experiment and fail as fast as possible, as frequently as possible. Meaning that just like you were told no, that it wouldn't work to get people's comments and their engagement, so on. Try it out. But I think the scale of time of how long to try something out is unknown to early entrepreneurs. Like, what is it? Is it 3 years? Is it 2 years? Right? Because you don't want to go for 10 years against the grain and then just get all your, basically crush all your entrepreneurial juice, because that happens to a lot of people as well. So, there's now no clear answer for how long to go. But what I'm saying is minimum 6 months, just like they say it takes 6 months to build a habit.
Right.
Really stay focused, put your idea to test, talk about it. And another let me get it to this way, because you're a digital marketer. I think the phenomenon about 2021 is that any idea, any service could be very quickly validated or just gotten feedback on through digital marketing. I don't care what you're doing.
Right.
Spend a couple $1,000s, get it to the audience you think should be engaging with your service, your business, your product, or your content, and you'll get your answer very quickly whether or not you're delivering value through the comment.
Right.
You can't argue with the comments.
I
So
love I love what you said though. To the audience you think is going to want it, because you may be surprised. And when I started, so I had a blog forever ago, and I thought, okay, so what's my target audience? It's women in their early 40s who've just had kids who love running.
mhm,
Right? Pretty narrow target. And then I found out very quickly that my main audience was 52% men. Yes, I had women, but they ranged in age. It wasn't who I thought it was going to be, and then most of them weren't even moms. I had no idea until I started putting it out there and started getting back
yep.
feedback from them. So I think if I had to give my biggest tip is to not listen. If you're doing something that's different than everybody else, don't listen when somebody says, but that's not how people do it.
Right.
Because, no, just because that's the way we've always done it doesn't mean it's the way we should always do it.
And if somebody
Right?
tells you that, you might have the idea. If you get enough,
Right.
oh, this is not going to work, I love to hear that. This is not going to work.
Absolutely.
Okay, it's not going
Absolutely.
to
And,
work for you, but maybe I can make it work because you already think it doesn't. So
yeah.
let's try it out.
Actually, I haven't tried the podcast yet, so I can't tell you it's going to be great. But there is a podcast out there right now by Mark. I think it's Mark Jacobson. I hope I have his name right, but it's called "That's Never Going to Work." So the guy from Netflix has created something called That's Never Going to Work," where he talks to other entrepreneurs who have gone through the same thing.
I love that.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about favorite books because you can't have an episode without that. So you currently are reading, or you've just finished reading "Hustle Harder, Hustle Smarter."
Yep.
Right. And tell me a little bit about that.
For the music industry specifically, it talks about 50 Cent and his path to stardom as a musician, you know, the trials and tribulations he went through as a child, and then how he was able to transition from music into other areas of business successfully. And I just want musicians specifically to read it of all genres, but mainly rappers and musicians in the R&B industry, because that's the genre he represents, so to speak. I want them to read it because the way he made it and the way he approached it is probably not what musicians would automatically think he did. I know for a fact they're going to be surprised. Just a few examples. This man never drinks or smokes, 100% sober in everything he does. He's very intuitive. He understands what entertainment is versus of how he acts in the boardroom. He knows when to turn on the entertainment hat, and he knows how to internalize and how to develop relationships on the business side. And then it's a different animal. And he's very intuitive into everything. And I just want musicians specifically to hear it, because I think, out of all the recent books I'm reading for business and for the music industry, this is a must. It's definitely a very interesting and very learning rich book.
I want to suggest something too. So even if you're not a musician, if you're listening to this and you're not a musician, check it out, because what I have found is that every book I read teaches me something, right? But specifically when I read about business owners and people who, I read Steve Martin's book, and I will tell you my one takeaway from Steve Martin's book, which is really nothing to do with business at all, but it was something that I tell myself a lot. He, early on, he had a girlfriend who broke up with him. When I say early on, I think he was 15. And he went to work, and his boss said, why are you acting the way you're acting today? And he says, well, my girlfriend broke up with me. And he expected some sympathy. And the guy said, oh, that's going to happen. Right? And it sounds small, but I tell myself that a lot when something goes wrong. I'm like, oh, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? So when you're listening to books or you're reading books, think about all the different ways you might learn from it, whether it's, a specific, to your genre like this with music or not. I've listened to the Nike book, Shoe Dog, and totally different industry, and I've learned so much from it. So, take that into account.
Absolutely. And I would say that, what shaped my disruption is that I've read a lot about bunch of different industries. Elon Musk, how major sports teams pick their captains. A lot of psychology books. I'm obsessed with psychology and understanding people. You name it. I mean, industries all over the place. My own experience in energy efficiency industry, real estate, and software development. I think that's what made me give me the ability to think outside the box, so to speak. And when I got into the music industries, they're like, all these different industries are doing X, Y, and Z. I've never seen that done in the music industry. And if it is done, which I tested and is working, I think it'll be phenomenal. And sure, it was, and that's all it took, just having a little understanding of a bunch of things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just open your world. But so let's talk a little bit more about opening your world, because, and I am going to oh my gosh, Kendra, what's his name? Kendrick
Lamar.
Sorry, total blank. I was standing, and I just thought it was the funniest thing, because first of all, I'm 5 feet tall. Clearly, I'm an older white woman, and I was standing in a Chipotle in Baltimore, probably right when he had released his last album, and I'm standing in line, and this guy in front of me is listening to this music, and he was clearly liking it a lot. And he turns around to me, and I don't know even what possessed him, except that he turned around to me and he goes, "You've got to listen to this." Wow. And it's like it just like had touched him or hit him so hard. He's like, and I was like, okay, I'll listen to it. So, do you have a musician right now that you're like, people need to listen to this person?
It's from the major stream musicians, and I make a point to listen to new music every week on Spotify to understand what's out there. But on that level of Kendrick Lamar, Tupac's my favorite artist, and he, got a lot of this energy out of me. Like just him talking about helping his community, learn about the business. He was different. The content was just power. It spoke to me at least. I think Kendrick is the same. But some of the clients that we have that I could tell you to listen to, which I think have that ability, one is my client Obas. Talking about the business aspect, hip hop artist just had a major feature with Rick Ross, and we helped him market his brand to a level where he's now able to sort of get in front of these major artists. But another one, which is another industry, another genre altogether, is Hello Sister. It's a three girl pop band. They're sisters. I think their ages are 12, 13, and 16 or 15. And just the intelligence they have and what they want to do. They want to be authors and help, kids that listen to them now to learn and do these different things. I love that about them. They want to change the world. They want to benefit, animals and our climate, things like that. So I just love when artists have these different passions. So that's the two, Hello Sister and Obaz, out of our client pool and people that are in our network. Man, but I listen to so much music. I'm trying to think who captured me in that way recently. Give me if we have more content to
Yeah,
talk
actually,
about.
I'm going to
I'll
ask
think
you, do
about
me a favor and put links to both of those artists for me in the comments and over
that. Okay.
our private chat over here, and I'll try to put them up so people can find them because I'd love to do that. But while you're doing that, I want to tell people something else. So one of the reasons I don't usually do this. I don't usually say who's your favorite musician or who's a musician to listen to. But one of the reasons I wanted to do this today is because I want to give a shout out to a musician that I love. And I love him because I know him and I have known him for a few years now. He's a young musician, drummer, but he's been doing a lot of things lately, and he's about to release an album. I think it comes out this week. He released over the weekend a single. You can find it on YouTube. Follow Julian Ewald. He was in Z Band with Zayn. So if you ever watched Zayn play with Z Band, he was that amazing drummer, that young drummer. But he's incredible. And this song tonight is just beautiful. I think you'll love it. Give him a follow. You'll be helping a young musician. I think he's 16, maybe 17 years old, but you're going to love it. So I want you to follow him. That's why I wanted to bring that up. All right. So yeah, thank you for letting me do that right on your time here. So I'm gonna oops, hold on one second. I did that wrong. I'm gonna copy these over. So did you think of anybody else who you think they should
Yeah,
follow?
no, I have not.
That's okay. That's
Yeah,
okay.
I
So
discovered that I'll say one thing, right? Because this is part of my job being in the music industry, is to discover how many new artists are sort of marketing their brand and how they're doing it. The sheer number of artists and talent that's out there is incredible. There's just too many to name, right? And I don't even have the time as an entrepreneur right now to even like fall in love with a new artist per se, because I'm listening to so many every
right.
single week. But I guess for the whole industry, just to give people an idea, go to one of my favorite playlists is the New Music Friday playlist from Spotify. And they generally, give a blend of all the major artists that are putting out projects and a lot of the independent ones. But man, I find artists on the New Music Friday playlist on Spotify that are just getting started, that have, small brands that, a lot of independent artists will be excited to find because it gives them that kind of understanding or validation that says, man, if they can make it, I can make it as well if I just do the right things,
Absolutely.
if I understand the industry. So I just want to give a shout out to all the musicians and artists that are out there that are figuring out how to make it on their own, because we're finally in the era where the market is going to determine what's good or not in music. No
Right.
longer will the major labels be the puppeteers, so to speak, where they get to spend the millions of dollars on whatever they want to market, and just the sheer repetition is going to get stuck in your head and you're going to like it. But now I
Right.
think the game is slowly changing every year.
One of the things I like about that, and I hadn't thought about it until you just now said that. One of the things I like about that is it used to be that you could be a phenomenal musician. You could be incredible. But if you weren't also good looking, if you didn't also have what it took, in your
Yep.
body, and you could be, overweight, whatever, you would get pushed to the side. And now music is getting out there, and people make that decision,
Hmm.
not just the music industry, what's going to sell. Well, they're going to tell you what's going to sell because they're watching it. So I also want to tell you there is a podcast that I listen to. It's called Next, and it's by Chris Bro up in New York. He was I think iHeartRadio, I think he was an iHeartRadio DJ, but he has a podcast called Next, and that's what he does is review new music every week. I love
Awesome.
that podcast. So have a look at that, have a listen to that. Everybody else, I want to remind you what's coming up next. Give me 1 minute, Matej. Don't go away, okay?
Sure.
Okay. Oops, I went away. There you go. All right. So I want to remind you to please subscribe. Please subscribe wherever you're listening to podcasts. This podcast is run by a small business, and we use it to get our message out there, but we also use it to get the message out there for other entrepreneurs. And in this climate, it's important. So please do help us spread the word. Please do subscribe over on YouTube, wherever you're listening to podcasts. And if you have time, wherever you're listening to the podcast, leave us a review. It makes a big difference to us. I also want to tell you what we have coming up next week. We have Allison Williams. She's going to talk about niching down, finding that niche. She's actually a strategist for law firms. That's what she does in real life. But she also talks about niching down, finding the industry that really works for you and going for it there. So it's really going to be a great conversation. So please do tune back in. Matej, how are people going to get in touch with you?
Glad you asked that. So I just in the chat gave you my Instagram page. So for me on Instagram, I'm Matej_H_entrepreneur. I know it's long, but Matej spelled Matej. And I think this is one of the times where my foreign name is actually beneficial to me, because you type in Matej, and I'm usually the first one that comes up on YouTube and on Instagram as well. And really go and check out my company's website, Digital Science Media. That'd be the easiest. I like to say that we are the nerds in the music industry, the scientists that get to experiment with your content, show you who your audience is, and strategize with you on how to get your content to the next level. So we're like scientists, digitalsciencemedia.com.
Awesome. I want to say one more thing, and I want to remind people of this. As I always say, I like to give you one nugget that is in my brain. But you and I, if you look at the two of us, if you see our industries, you think, how are they going to help each other, right? But as I'm talking and I'm thinking about Burgers and Bands, and I'm thinking about the musicians that we're involved with through Blues Alley down this way, and through Paul Carr Jazz ensembles, and I'm thinking, wow, there's so much we can do. So stop doing that as a business owner. Stop saying, well, I don't know, that industry is not for me, I'm not going to be able to help anybody there. Network. The more people you meet, the more people you're going to connect. And if I can help you, which I know I can make some great introductions for you, then eventually somebody's going to come back, and it's going to come back and help me. So
Yep.
That's how networking works. It doesn't mean that I'm going to give to you and you're going to give back to me. It means that I'm going to give to you, and the universe somehow is going to find a way to get back to me.
Absolutely.
So
And I would love to talk with you after this. And look, we turn down clients all the time as well, because they're just not in the music industry. And I like to,
right.
the next podcast that you mentioned, there's a lot of truth to both methodologies. Niche down to a particular industry,
Mm-hmm.
perfect that, because you'll scale faster. And as you learn that, then slowly start expanding to different industries. Because if I was to say I'm a digital marketing company that accommodates any industry, I think what's going to happen to me is what these digital marketing agencies that I hired in the past, because they were not niche down and they said they could handle us. And they did a mediocre job at best, because they were not pros in our particular industry, our lingo, our consumer base and understanding. So, I love that. But I would love to speak with you, because I can maybe get you some business as well from the people that we unfortunately have to say no to at this time and moment.
That would be great. And that's how this networking works. So I just do want to say that. You stick around. Everybody else, I will see you next week, and I look forward to it. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye-bye.